Have you ever been irrationally triggered by someone, like disproportionately annoyed or angry at a total stranger, and then later realized that it had nothing to do with them? That reaction has a name. Carl Jung called it the shadow, and today we're going to talk about what it is, how it runs your life without your permission, and how astrology, when used correctly, can actually become one of the most precise tools for integrating it. Carl Jung's concept of the shadow is everything about yourself that your ego decided was unacceptable. So instead of processing it, you repressed it. You made it unconscious. This isn't inherently about dark or evil traits. For some people, the shadow is aggression. For others, it's neediness, sexuality, ambition, softness, even joy if you were raised in a house where joy wasn't safe. The content is different for everyone. It's shaped by your family, your culture, your early experiences of what got you loved and what got you punished. Here's the problem. Repressing it doesn't make it disappear. It just makes it unconscious. And what's unconscious doesn't stay quiet. It leaks out sideways. That is what we call projection. It's why you can meet someone who embodies the exact quality you've spent your life hiding in yourself and feel this instant, irrational charge toward them. It's not really about them. It's that they are serving as a mirror. Unintegrated shadow also shows up as self-sabotage, as explosive reactions that feel disproportionate to what actually triggered them. They show up as patterns that you keep repeating and can't quite explain, attracting the same kind of person, ending up in the same kind of conflict, again and again and again. That's usually the psyche trying to force the material into consciousness because you haven't done it voluntarily yet. But here's the part that people miss. The shadow isn't your enemy. Once you integrate it, once you actually own it instead of disowning it, that energy becomes available to you as real power. That aggression that you repressed for so long, that can become boundary setting, strategic clarity, the ability to protect yourself and the people that you love. The neediness that you were ashamed of, that's emotional intelligence. The capacity for real intimacy and connection. The ambition that you learned to hide so you wouldn't threaten anyone, that's your vision, your drive, your motivation. Integration doesn't mean acting out every shadow impulse. It means you finally have a conscious relationship to that energy. So you're choosing how to use it instead of it quietly running you from underneath. And nowhere does this show up more intensely than in intimate relationships. Sexual intimacy strips away a lot of the usual defenses that people use to manage their shadow material from day to day. You're exposed in a way that can trigger exactly the material that you've spent your entire life keeping unconscious. So you project it onto your partner, hard. If you've repressed your own neediness, your partner's need can suddenly feel suffocating, when in reality, what you're looking at is your own disowned vulnerability. If you've buried your sexuality out of shame, you might become controlling of your partner's desire, or judgmental of it, or lose yourself entirely in their desire. If aggression is your shadow, your partner's assertiveness can register as a threat that doesn't match what's actually happening in the room. Intimacy also activates dormant material. You start to genuinely need this person, and if you've built your identity on self-sufficiency, that need can feel terrifying. So it comes out sideways, things like jealousy and possessiveness and withdrawal. Two people with unintegrated shadow material in a relationship often become each other's mirror for exactly what neither one of them wants to see. That can be destructive, or if there's enough awareness and willingness, it can become the very thing that forces both people to finally do the work. So what do you do if you're the one on the receiving end of this? Maybe someone keeps casting you as the bad guy when really all you're doing is expressing normal emotion or having a normal, rational confrontation about a problem. For them, though, it's triggering something much bigger than the moment calls for. First, it's important to acknowledge that you can't integrate someone else's shadow material for them. You can't make them see what they're projecting. And trying to over-explain or defend yourself, saying things like, "That's not what I meant," or "You're putting that on me," that often backfires. It just hardens the projection because now you're also the person who won't acknowledge their feelings. The real move is boundaries, not performance. Something like, I hear you're triggered, that's real for you, and I also know that it's not about what I just did. Then you take a step back. You hold your own clarity instead of trying to convince them of it. The harder question is whether you stay in the relationship with someone while they're doing or refusing to do their shadow work. If they've committed to the story that you're the problem, staying close can become a form of enabling their avoidance. Sometimes the most honest thing is distance. Not necessarily forever, but enough that you are not continuously cast as the villain in someone else's unexamined story. That's not abandonment, that's a form of self-preservation. All right, so let's talk about who does shadow work and who tends to avoid it. And before we get into these specific practices, it's worth taking the time to name something honestly. Not everyone is in the position to do shadow work right now, and that's not a moral failing. It's one of those things that you have to have a certain level of grounded material security before your mind can start to reach into the shadows and sort things out in those places. People who move towards shadow work tend to be psychologically curious people. They can tolerate a certain amount of discomfort or shame without collapsing into it or immediately throwing up a defense. Often they've already had some kind of experience, like a therapeutic thing or spiritual work or whatever, that taught them that looking inward is something that they could survive. People who avoid shadow work often have a lot riding on their self-image. They need to be the good one, the evolved one, the one who's above pettiness or anger or need. Admitting shadow material feels to them like admitting failure. And sometimes, and this really matters, people avoid it because looking inwardly genuinely isn't safe for them. If you have real trauma history, shadow work might need to wait until you have stabilization and safety first. That is not being avoidant. That is sequencing. And it's smart. The clearest tell that somebody is spiritually bypassing is when they use language like, I only choose love and light, or I don't believe in negativity. Those things are not a form of evolution. That's often the shadow in disguise, still being managed instead of met. If you're new to shadow work, then there are a few honest things that we need to address. This work isn't linear. You'll think that you've integrated something, and then a trigger shows up, and you realize you haven't resolved it, you've just gotten better at hiding it. Like you've moved it from one corner of your psyche to another corner. That's not failure, that's the process. And it does get harder before it gets easier. Once you start seeing your own patterns, you can't unsee them. That takes real courage. Give yourself credit for starting. So, how do you actually do shadow integration work? There are a few doors in. So the first one that I'm going to mention is therapy. A skilled therapist creates a container where you can say the thing that you've never said out loud and not be punished for it. Therapy, especially when you find the right therapist, can be a really useful container for shadow work. The next one is somatic practice. Things like breath work and certain movement modalities like yoga. Your body holds what your mind won't let itself know. If you tend to intellectualize things or dissociate from the problem, then somatic work tends to be a really great access point. You feel the material inside of you instead of just theorizing about it. Journaling is another form of shadow work. This works because it bypasses your self-editing. Nobody's reading it. You can write the rage, the envy, the shame, the desire that you've never said to anybody. And that level of privacy is what makes it really honest. Another access point to shadow work is plant medicine journeys. These are journeys with substances like ayahuasca, psilocybin, or other traditional plant medicines. These plant medicines can be a powerful door into shadow work when approached with real preparation and respect. These journeys can dissolve the usual defenses that your ego relies on to keep shadow material out of view. which is exactly why people sometimes encounter in a matter of hours what might otherwise take them years to access in an ordinary state of consciousness. Material that's been buried for decades can surface directly, sometimes visually, sometimes somatically, often without the usual filters. But this is also why the container matters so much. Plant medicine doesn't just show you your shadow, it can overwhelm you with it if you're not held and contained properly. Experienced facilitation, intentional setting, and real integration work afterward are not optional extras. They are what determines whether the experience becomes genuine integration or just an intense event that you don't know what to do with. What you receive during the trip, whether you see God or journey to the future or back into the beginning of time, or you visit the alien council, or whatever it decides to show you, because it will take you where you need to go. Remember that the inside itself is not the integration work. What you do with it in the weeks and months after, that's the integration. A quick note, if you are considering this path, it's important to research the legal status of these substances where you live. If you do pursue this work, then do it with an experienced, reputable facilitator. Another door into shadow work is contemplative practice, things like prayer, meditation, and ritual ceremonies. These create a specific kind of space to be honest with yourself that ordinary daily reflection doesn't do. There's a vulnerability there that's hard to access elsewhere. Another door into shadow work is creative expression, things like art, music, writing. And the reason why is because shadow material wants a form. Giving it one doesn't just process it privately, it externalizes it, and that changes your relationship to it entirely. Every one of these approaches works for the same underlying reason. They create a space where the disowned part of you can exist without immediate judgment, and then you choose to take it back. Remember that whatever tool you choose matters less than the honesty that you bring to the process. And this brings me to astrology and why I think it belongs on this list when used the right way. Astrology is not useful for shadow work when it is used as a form of entertainment or prediction. It becomes useful for shadow work when you dive deeply into it because it gives you precision. It's not vague self-help language like embrace your true self. It's specific. It says, here is where your energy is structurally oriented. Here is what this transit is currently asking from you. Here is the exact pattern to look at. That specificity creates friction with the story that your ego prefers about itself. And that friction is where shadow work actually happens. Your natal chart is a reflection of your psychological framework, how you are mentally built, your stable trait level material. Transits map what you're currently being invited or pushed to integrate. Transits are temporary active material. And keeping that distinction clear matters because conflating who I am with what I am working through right now weakens the whole practice. And here's another critical point. Astrology gives you permission to look at shadow material without pathologizing it. You're not broken. You're not failing. You're a person with a certain placement in a certain house under a certain transit, and here's what that's asking of you. That framing alone lets people go places they'd otherwise completely defend against. But the framework only works if you're rigorous with it, if you let it show you what's actually uncomfortable instead of using it to confirm what you already wanted to believe about yourself. Astrology can be a mirror for your shadow, and it can become a very sophisticated form of avoidance if you only ever use it to flatter yourself. So if you're going to use astrology as a shadow integration practice, don't soften it. Let it be specific. Let it be sharp. Let it be uncomfortable when it needs to be. That's when it actually works. So in conclusion, your shadow isn't the enemy. It's the part of you that's waiting to be claimed. Whatever door you walk through, whether that's therapy, somatic work, journaling, prayer, creative expression, or using your astrology to map through your shadow, The thing that makes any of them effective is the same: honesty over comfort. If this video resonated with you, please subscribe. I intend to keep going deeper into the intersection of psychology and astrology, and I'd love to hear in the comments, what is your preferred form of shadow work? And have you ever used astrology to learn new things about yourself and resolve your own shadow material? All right, that's it for now, and I'll see you next time.